What's going on, guys? Brother Telepathy here. I'm Micah. This is Graham. We've got a video for you guys today. It's going to be the 2025 NFL offseason QB landing spots. We're predicting where these guys are going to go, some of the hot names, a few draft names we're going to throw in there as well. So this can be an exciting one. Graham?
Yeah, let's do it. Starting with Mr. Aaron Rodgers. So obviously, big news came out today as of the recording that they are parting ways with Aaron Rodgers, in principle. So we'll have to wait for the actual release of Aaron Rodgers, but it'll be before the start of the new year, I believe, because I think if it's after that March 12th date, then he gets some sort of a bonus. So it'll be sooner rather than later on this one. So on each of these, we're going through the potential options, best fit, maybe a dark horse situation for each player, and then the final prediction. We agreed upon these. So with that being said, obvious first option is retirement. This is something that is probably maybe the most likely, honestly, is
I
just
think after the
retirement.
news today, it's starting to become more and more
Yeah.
possible.
Now, the interesting thing is, I've seen some people make this point, is that the fact that he flew out to New York to meet with their brass about coming back, it seems like he probably is at least still interested, and nothing's really indicating that he's not interested, but just knowing the nature of Aaron Rodgers, it's something that is definitely in play. Ultimately, we landed on the Steelers being the final spot for them. I do think the Steelers probably take a big swing at quarterback this year. They got to, elevate that room certainly. And so, we know that Mike Tomlin and Aaron Rodgers have a ton of respect for one another. So it does seem like a perfect pairing from that sense. I also think that this is really the only team he probably goes to. Dark horse was the Titans because he has mentioned a few times on Pat McAfee show that he loves Nashville and would like to retire there ultimately. So maybe that's an easy transition. And of course, the Titans need a vet in there as well, no matter what they do in the draft. So ultimately, I think we feel pretty good about the Steelers prediction, though. Anything you want to add to that?
Dude, honestly, I think you nailed it. I think everything you said, I second. I mean, I really don't have much to add aside from I think retirement, obviously, after the news today of, that he's probably going to get, or, well, going to get released, not officially, but I think retirement is starting to look like a really strong option for him as well. I think that his pride, I say it like it's a bad thing, but like his pride, like won't let him retire. Kind of like how a lot of guys towards the end of their careers, like want to,
Sure.
keep playing past their means, which I think Rodgers actually was not as bad as, people would lead you to believe this past year. So
That's true,
I think
too.
Steelers makes the most sense to me, and ultimately that's what we decided on for his prediction. Kirk Cousins here though, Captain Kirk. I got a lot of love for Captain Kirk, but dark horse, I think Sean McVay. I think that would be a phenomenal system for him. We'll touch on the Rams later in this video, but options: Kevin Stefanski reuniting in Cleveland makes so much sense that it's stupid. It's really like there's no other with the contract situation with Deshaun. They're gonna need to get somebody cheap. Kirk looks like he's gonna be moved on from Atlanta. The Browns are gonna have to tie up a ton of money to stay afloat if they sign him. I think that every part of it just makes the most sense here.
Yeah, I'm with you that the main thing that we landed on with the Browns and Kirk coming together was the money, because the Browns, they're not able to trade for a guy, they're not able to acquire somebody in free agency with a lot of money. They can't pay a Sam Darnold or anything like that, so it needs to be a cheap option, which is either rookie or somebody like Kirk who's gonna be very cheap on the veteran market. So there's that, and that's kind of the same reason maybe the Saints, because obviously they got a lot tied up in their financials right now too. But I think that's the kind of the situation. He's a cheap, good option, 2 years removed from his injury.
Real quick, I also wanted to add for this one. I think that this kind of, for me personally at least, this kind of takes the Browns out of a spot for taking a quarterback at the number two pick. I think that even that you're wrapping yourself up in a future that looks kind of bleak, or not. Maybe bleak is a bad
Or
word, but
just
looks
murky at least.
looks murky with the Myles Garrett news. Like, can you support a rookie quarterback who's going to be making more than Kirk Cousins? If the Browns obviously make that move,
Right.
you're not going to be able to support him with a strong roster. I mean, like the weapons are fair. Offensive line is decent. Defense looks like it's starting to like take a decline though. Denzel Ward may be a little disgruntled, maybe possibly getting moved. Myles Garrett requesting that trade. There's a lot going on with the Browns, so I'm interested to see what their offseason looks like. But Kirk Cousins in Cleveland makes the most sense.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, so let's go to Derek Carr. I'm just going to go ahead and jump to the prediction. This is my favorite option for the Titans would be to sign somebody like Derek Carr. This would be a reuniting with Brian Callahan, who was his quarterback coach in Oakland at the time for the Raiders, and so would definitely make a lot of sense for that reason. I think it's also very likely he does remain in New Orleans. Now, Kellen Moore, as of today, the recording of our video, he was pretty non-committal about Derek Carr coming back. Nothing crazy, but it didn't say either way. It just very much coach speak, was just kind of non-committal. So who knows? I think there will be a lot of suitors for Derek Carr because I think a lot of people in the league know that he played very well in the games that he did play. So I think there will be a lot of suitors out there for Derek Carr. I certainly think he would fit a Brian Dable offense too. So that's kind of our dark horse as well. But ultimately, I think it would make a ton of sense to go to Tennessee. And then, whether they draft a quarterback, let him kind of be that mentor or let him be that mentor for Will Levis if that's the route they go to. So I think this would make a lot of sense for a lot of teams. But our final prediction would be the Titans.
Yeah, I feel like Derek Carr is kind of just like a plug and play guy, like more so than any of these other guys. I feel like Derek Carr, proven, battle tested, been through injuries, like you just kind of put him on any offense and you're gonna stay afloat. You're not gonna you know what your ceiling is gonna be with Derek Carr, but I think that you're just getting a solid guy and a good leader in the room, and ultimately I think that's what a lot of these five teams are looking for. So I like the Tennessee prediction. I think the Giants are just hungry for whoever they can get at this point.
Yeah, I think that the final point there essentially is that he probably is, if you're talking about a combination of both monetarily and like win now or like upgrade your room, I think he probably is the best option on the market.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to add. We got Sam Darnold here next. Sam Darnold, obviously, there's a ton of buzz. I mean,
Big name, yeah.
but yeah, this is the biggest. I saw a tweet today that this was the biggest. I mean, obviously the biggest quarterback free agent signing, but probably one of the bigger free agent signings in general this year. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes. It'll be interesting to see what his market looks like, given the falling apart of the last two games. But that doesn't discredit what he did weeks 1 through 18. So Sam Darnold's gonna be interesting. Best fit is Minnesota. Kind of hard to argue with that. I mean, with what he just did in Minnesota. I feel like Minnesota would be the best fit for every quarterback on this list, to be fair. So,
Sure.
dark horse is the Raiders. I think Raiders makes the most sense. Giants is also another favorite pick of mine. I think Giants would be pretty poetic, him coming back to the other side of MetLife and as a new player. I think that'd be like a fun storyline. So, but I think it also makes the most sense for the situation they're in, kind of at the mercy of those first two picks. So, I think him going to New York is a good fit.
Yeah, I think this would still allow them to draft a quarterback, and maybe that's controversial, but obviously the Falcons just did it last year with Kirk Cousins, and obviously Darnold is a good bit younger than Kirk Cousins, so there's kind of some thoughts there, but I think yeah, like you said, it would be kind of like poetic in a sense, but we've also heard some murmurs that the Raiders are really interested in pursuing Sam Darnold as well, and I think that makes a lot of sense too. So I think it's kind of a 50-50 toss up between those two teams, but I do think he lands ultimately, one of those two places. So we're going with the Giants on this one.
Yeah, I like that. Next up, we got Russell Wilson. Graham, you want to start us?
Yeah, I think like this is just too easy from the Pete Carroll hire. I think this just makes too much sense from a fit standpoint. Would be, again, a lot of these predictions are based on like reuniting or going back to a place you're familiar. But that's often how it works in free agency. Obviously, money is the biggest driver, but when there are other factors at play, that's certainly something that's important to a lot of guys is familiarity with a building or with a coaching staff or some sense of that. So, I think there is a chance that he remains in Pittsburgh. I think that's kind of unlikely. And again, the Raiders I think makes the most sense. We added the Titans as a dark horse here because I do think that if the Titans draft Cam Ward, I think that he would be a very good mentor because they are somewhat similar from a play style standpoint and like a build standpoint. Obviously, Cam Ward's a little bit bigger than Russ, but from like their play style, I kind of see them in a similar light in a sense. So I think that could make sense to like play. You often want to have your backup quarterback and your starting quarterback be able to seamlessly come into a game and still run the same offense. So that's kind of why we put dark horse there. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love what you said at the beginning about relationships because ultimately that's what the NFL is. Whether it's familiarity in a building with a guy, with a front office, we just did a coaching video. A lot of coaches bringing in guys they know and can trust. That's what the NFL is. Whether it's getting a job or getting promoted, it's building relationships. So I think that the Russ to the about to Oakland, the Las Vegas pairing makes way too much sense, and there's really not much else to add aside from that. Justin Fields though
This is
is
one of your favorite fits, so
yeah,
you go
yeah.
ahead.
This
Yeah.
is this is a big one for. I mean, obviously, I watched Justin Fields in Chicago a ton, division rival, obviously, and I wanted him to be good so bad, and he never was. But I mean, I was a little bit torn because I liked him as a player. I liked that he wasn't succeeding with Chicago. Maybe that's not fair to say, but no, I think that he deserves a second chance. I think that even in the first 6 games he played, winning record, playing winning football ultimately with Pittsburgh is the biggest thing that you want out of a quarterback. You want to win games. I think that letting him sit has given him time to develop, hopefully. We didn't really see a ton of strides out of the first 6 games with Pittsburgh, but it's kind of hard to tell because that's a funky offense. Like they're a run first team. Obviously, they brought in Atlanta coach, blanking on his name again. I'm terrible with names, dude.
Arthur
This
Smith.
Arthur Smith. This is becoming a theme on the channel where I can't remember anybody's name when it's time to record. Arthur Smith. They bring in Arthur Smith, obviously notoriously a run first guy. So we'll see kind of what that looks like, but enough about him. I think the Jets makes a ton of sense. This gives Jets maybe a new air in the building that they haven't had, like a young, exciting player. Kind of, this is like a 180 from Rodgers almost, and it also feels like an Aaron Glenn guy, kind of like a redemption story. Like let's see how this plays out. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that New York is a great fit for him.
Yeah, I do too. I'm right there with you with the Aaron Glenn fit. I think he would. This would be somebody that would love to coach this guy, and vice versa, probably. And I think he would. He does deserve a shot after those first few games in Pittsburgh. With something to work with there, and the Jets really don't have any other great options at quarterback. So I think this would make a ton of sense for that reason as well. We put the Saints in there as a best fit just because maybe there's some blending there with like Taysom Hill, his running ability. So maybe you could implement that with Justin Fields, of course. He could definitely remain in Pittsburgh. Who knows exactly? It would kind of be surprising if they started Russ the whole year and then moved on from Russ to keep Justin Fields. So I'm not really sure about that one. And then, we added the Rams because that would just be very interesting pairing with Sean McVay. I think they could do some damage too. And we haven't seen Sean McVay with a different archetype of quarterback. We've seen like Jared Goff, obviously, and Matthew Stafford. So it would be very interesting to see him with like a running, dual threat type of quarterback. But I'm with you. I think the Jets make a ton of sense, especially obviously after Aaron Rodgers is gone.
And the last thing I'll add about this one, it all depends on how the NFL views Justin Fields. Do teams view him as a maybe a former first round pick who had time to sit and develop? Do they view him as we mentioned with Sean Payton? Is he a gadget guy? Like we don't really know how the NFL views Justin Fields at this point, but I would if I am a betting man, and I'm gonna bet that he finds a role as a starter again in this league here soon, just given the background. And another thing is Aaron
The
Glenn,
age too.
the age,
Sorry to
yeah,
interrupt you.
no, I forgot it, so I'm glad you said something. 26 years old, I believe, 25, 26.
25 or 26. Yeah.
So obviously super young, has a lot of tread left on the tires and a lot of room to develop. So we'll see about that one. And Stafford here, obviously the best fit, the team that he won a Super Bowl with, right? I mean, it makes the most sense. We're obviously hearing a ton of buzz today about the Giants being interested. I know the Giants fan base, I've been on their Twitter today. They're super interested in bringing in someone like him. Like I mentioned earlier, they're kind of thirsty for a quarterback. And obviously Stafford, not the same player, 38 years old, 37 years old, as he was, 2 years ago, 8 years ago. But Stafford can still ball, so I think that Los Angeles makes the most sense for him.
Yeah, I have a very hard time imagining they actually make a departure. I just don't see that really playing out. I don't really imagine Sean McVay wants to do that. I think Matthew Stafford could be open to going to a different team potentially, but I think he knows that would be, like we said, his best fit would just be to kind of stay where he's at. Obviously, the Giants, like you mentioned, throw Steelers on there too, just because again, I think they probably want to try to make a swing at quarterback. So if Aaron Rodgers is unavailable and Matthew Stafford is, I think this is kind of makes sense for the same reasons. So that's kind of our thoughts there. I think the Rams is the most likely for sure. Awesome.
I'll let you touch on this one. Yeah.
Yeah, so now we're getting into our rookies here. We included Cam Ward and Shador Sanders in this video just because as the kind of top two quarterbacks here. So obviously in terms of options, you've got pretty much everybody at the top of the draft being an option for Cam Ward and for Shador Sanders for that matter. I'm going to touch on best fit. I think him and a Brian Dable offense, I know I mentioned this in our mock draft video, would be such an incredible pairing. We know Brian Dable likes to push the ball down the field. Obviously did that a lot with Josh Allen in Buffalo. So I think the fit would make a ton of sense in New York. And then on the flip side of that, I could definitely see the Jets, with Aaron Glenn wanting to go ahead and get their quarterback of the future established. Maybe a trade up happens from number 7 up to number 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever the case is. So I could see that as well. Ultimately, I know in our last mock draft, I had Abdul Carter going to the Titans. I think if I had to bet, I would assume that Cam Ward probably does end up in Tennessee when it's all said and done in April. But yeah, I think any of these teams are obviously potential options.
Yeah, it's super open, like you said. Trade ups happen. Same with we don't know how. Gosh, massive stutter. We don't know how they're gonna feel about Cam Ward, the NFL. That is. Obviously, most teams have him as the quarterback 1 right now. We don't really know what that looks like though at the number 1 spot. We know he's the number 1 quarterback. Do we know if he's the number 1 pick? That's kind of where I'm at least in my personal study and research that I've done. But yeah, Tennessee number 1 overall makes the most sense. It feels like the most likely option. But that kind of segues us into Shador Sanders and what that means for him.
Can I make one more point on Cam Ward actually?
Yeah, go for it.
Before
Yeah.
you do that, I was just going to say we haven't had an opportunity to touch on this, but I think it does make sense in this situation. I think that teams are going to really be fond of Cam Ward's leadership abilities and just his mental makeup, like his football character, as a lot of people describe it. This guy is the equivalent of a gym rat in basketball. Like he is grinding football all the time. Seems to be an intelligent guy. And then if you hear stories, like I know Louis Riddick was talking about it on a podcast recently, that this guy has, he came into Miami and turned that team around, and he really elevated them, to the success they had. Guys like Elijah Arroyo, Restrepo, Damian Martinez, all their different players, they had breakout years, and a lot of that has to be due to Cam Ward and just what he demanded out of his teammates. So I think a lot of teams are going to like that. At the top of the draft. So sorry, I just wanted to make that point before you.
No, I'm glad you cut me off, so you could fit that in because it's worth talking about.
I've been waiting to say something about that, but I wanted to get it at some point. So.
No, I'm glad you brought it up because it's important. But Shador Sanders, the last person we're going to talk about in this video, it's no secret that Graham and I are not huge fans of Shador. But I do think that there's potential for him given the right system. I think that Shador, every quarterback in the NFL is a system quarterback at the end of the day. I think that the only true non-system quarterback in the NFL is probably Josh Allen. But that's another conversation. I think that every quarterback needs a system, and I think that I want to talk about the Dolphins. I know that this is not going to happen. I'm just going to put that out there. We know that the teams at the top of the draft are going to be interested. But ultimately, I think the Dolphins would be a phenomenal fit. I think that given the offense they have, where it's, hey, let's hit some layups, let's hand the ball off. We've got a running football head coach, obviously really smart mind. Tua's injury history, we need to think about backups because whenever we had backups last year, they couldn't run the system, to its fullest potential. And I think that someone like Shador would really thrive in that system. Hit the intermediate throws, short accuracy. I'm not super high on Shador's skill set, but I think that his accuracy in the short to intermediate is great, and I think that's what the Dolphins do a ton of. So ultimately, I think that's a great fit. Went on a little rant, but I want to talk about it. Graham, what do you think?
Yeah, good point. I'm in full agreement with you that, again, neither of us are super keen on him at the top of the first round just because he doesn't have those high-end traits and, in our opinion, just doesn't feel like a guy that you can really kind of lean into as a first overall pick or first round type of or early first round type of player, just because you often need to make up for the team around you in those situations. And he would thrive most in a situation where there is talent around him. And that's not a knock on him necessarily. It's just the type of quarterback that he is. And there are plenty of guys out there that are the same way. Brock Purdy, Tua is a good example of guys that, can execute an offense in a specific scheme, but you do need some pieces around them. So for that reason, I think I agree with you there. But with the Miami fit, again, I think the 49ers would make sense for the same reasons. Again, neither of those are happening at this point for sure. But yeah, of course, all the teams at the top are going to be interested. There's certainly a chance he slides. It happened in our last mock draft video. In our opinion, he's either going to go top 10 or he might go second round.
Yeah.
The range for him is going to be very interesting. But ultimately, we landed on the Saints. I think that you got Kellen Moore there. I think he could certainly want to build around Shador and his strengths. I think that Kellen Moore would also be interested in taking a quarterback to kind of potentially extend his leash as head coach. I know you're a little bit higher on him than me for the hiring sake, but I think if you get your guy in there and can really mold him into what you want, I think that would make a lot of sense too. So, we land on the Saints. Again, if they ultimately lose out on Derek Carr, they're going to need a quarterback and they need a cheap one. So I think this would make a lot of sense for that reason too.
Yeah, and real quick before I let you wrap us up, I think that we chose the Saints ultimately because of the fit. I think it's an interesting fit, but also because we don't know where we value him. Obviously, Graham and I think that he's more like a second round guy, but obviously the draft community consensus has him as a top 3 guy, usually going to the Giants. So the Saints feel like a fair middle ground for kind of where we're balancing that out. So Saints make a ton of sense, but they're also a great scheme fit, so it makes sense for that as well.
Yeah, good point. I think that was our last one there. So appreciate you guys tuning into this video here. Let us know if you guys agree with these predictions. It'll be interesting to look back in a few weeks and see how many of these we were correct on, and then go from there. So yeah, really appreciate you guys tuning in. That's all I got. Thanks so much.
Till next time, guys.